Hello there, I'm Blackbright, broadcasting out the UK. Welcome to my channel. First time passing through, you know the drill. Thumbs up, thumbs down, cascade or share, interact with my subscribers. And of course, it'd be really good if you subscribe. Last night I was talking to a friend of mine and he kept on talking about, oh, you must do a video about jealousy. You know, white people are jealous of us. And I'm like, I'm listening to him and I'm thinking to myself, you know, I don't think it's that simple. But he kept on saying it, you know. White people, they have to be jealous of us. That's why they want to get rid of us. And I'm sitting there and in the end, I just kind of switched off. Anyway, woke up this morning and it kind of played on my mind. And I'm thinking, you know, why would white people be jealous of us? If that was a fact. Okay, so then I started, you know me, I start going through my little looking up stuff and trying to piece things together. So what I've written down and what I'm going to talk through is my thoughts about some parts to do with history and some parts just to do with thinking out loud. Okay? So, competition. That's what I came up with. Who is better? Could it be that, all things being equal, that if black people were to compete with white people, they might win, or they might be better, or they might be equal? That was my first thought. And the only way that racists can conquer a black person is when they have an unfair advantage. Either a gun, a spray, use of force, power, legislation, and historically slavery. So I started thinking about the competition, and then I started thinking, well, when you think about it, if a white person competes fairly with a black person, normally the odds come out even, or maybe the black person might win, or the white person might win. But when we look at how black people are treated and how a lot of those white racists get the advantage over black people, it is through use of force, and normally more than one. It's never a one-on-one. It's always we're calling for backup, and there's always lots of them holding them down and abusing them. So then I started thinking, maybe it has got something to do with competition. Maybe it has got something to do with jealousy, in the fact that if they were to compete on a level playing field, they might lose. So then I started thinking about King Kong. And what I'm thinking, these are just thoughts. What I'm thinking of is if the white people, we're talking about the white supremacists, if they feel as though they cannot compete fairly with a black person, what might they want to do? Or what can they do? Then I started thinking about, that is probably why they started demonizing black people, equating them with apes. You know, Darwin's theory that, you know, black people are have a closer ancestral heritage to apes than white people. So then I started thinking, okay, so they've come up with this ape concept to demonize black people, to make them feel as though they're inferior. Then I started thinking about Tarzan, Planet of the Apes, this white man who rules the continent of Africa, and he's the governor of all these apes. And the apes are metaphors for black people. Then I thought about King Kong and how he was a metaphor for black masculinity, and how he came over as fierce and dangerous. And when you see depictions of him, it's carrying this white woman, sometimes by her hair, sometimes dragging her along the street. And what is interesting is that King Kong came out in 1933, and the Scottsboro brothers, the Scottsboro boys, sorry, were 9 teenage black youths, aged between 13 and 17. And 9 of them were convicted of rape of 2 white women, falsely convicted. Found out that it wasn't true, right? But when King Kong came out, this Japanese artist depicted King Kong dragging the white woman, calling it Scottsboro, Alabama, associating King Kong with the Scottsboro brothers, with the Scottsboro boys. That's how you can understand how cleverly black people are demonized. Done in film, people just watching King Kong. I never once thought about King Kong being a big black man. To me, he was an ape, and and he fell in love with a white woman. And it's really clever how over the years they have managed to demonize black people by making them look fearful, by making making that by depicting a black person as King Kong, and using that symbolism of the fact that he's big and aggressive and dangerous, and therefore white people have to be protected from him in order to bring him down. And it's never, not one person. I mean, he's so big and fearful, and he's a monster. It was the 4th greatest horror movie. So not only is he an ape, a big fearful ape, but he's also depicted in a horror movie. So one compounds the other. When you're thinking about King Kong representing black masculinity, and then also a horror movie which brings out fear and all of that kind of stuff in white people. So these are just thoughts, remember. I'm just going through them. So like 2 years later, like I said, King Kong is released after they've falsely arrested these 9 African American teenagers. Actually, I said 13 to 17, it was 13 to 19. They're falsely accused in Alabama of raping 2 white women on a train in 1931. So 2 years later, King Kong is released. News headlines carried by a Japanese artist who illustrated King Kong dragging away a white woman and calling it Scottsboro, Alabama. Another news headline said, guilty of rape. So you see how they link the two to kind of ferment that kind of image of the ape, the black person, the rape, the force, the big, the aggressive, the dangerous. So if King Kong is a metaphor for black masculinity or race, and is compounded by the fact it is a horror movie, what does that do for the mindset of white people and their perception of black masculinity? It sets the scene that black people who are equated with apes are scary, fierce, dangerous, and that white people need to be rescued from them. And like I said, the thing about Tarzan, the demonizing started mainly post-Darwin, who claimed that black people were a cross between Europeans and apes. Scientific racism depicted black people as being closer to the ape family, which is why the throwing of the banana skin on the football pitch is so offensive. Because you have people who know that history, or who still see black people as apes. I mean, there was a South African woman who equated the New York revelers, these black revelers in New York, with apes, saying it's only apes that litter and pick up, that litter but don't pick up. So there's still that mentality. When white people see black people, they see apes and monkeys. Forget the fact that in evolution, through evolution, everybody was supposed to have evolved from apes into humans. That doesn't seem to matter. For some reason, black people are still carrying that legacy, and white people have somehow managed to escape it. I'm not quite sure how, and they become angels. So then you have the animalization, which is Tarzan, which is King Kong and Planet of the Apes. I remember in Planet of the Apes, that conjectured flu, the simian flu. I mean, the subtle messaging, the subliminal messaging, it killed almost 4 billion people. And I know it's fictitious, but it doesn't matter that it's fictitious because it's already planting the seed that they want to plant. That black people are linked with bacteria, with disease. When you see Africa, they only show the diseased part of Africa. They show, I shouldn't even say the diseased part of Africa. They show the same old pictures year after year of young children with flies around their face and emaciated, as though the whole of Africa looks like that. They're not showing healthy Africans. And it's, again, to feed the narrative that Africa is diseased and full of poverty and goodness knows what else. And then you have Ebola equated with Africa, and then you have AIDS. And now, more recently, they're talking about the coronavirus, and BAMEs are disproportionately dying of the coronavirus, more or less to say, stay away from the BAMEs. You might catch it, or you might die from it. It's all these subliminal messaging from way back, but it's done so subtly over the years, and it's perpetuated even today in subtle forms. So then you've got animalization and bacterialism is another form of racism and dehumanization, and a way of eliminating the competition. They'll do anything to make black people inferior. They'll dehumanize them. They're less than. So they don't have to compete against them on an even playing field. They've got to get them out of the way, whether it's through mental institutions, whether it's through prisons, whether it's through detention centres, whether it's through killing them. They've got to get rid of them because they can't compete with them fairly. And they've got no intention of competing with them fairly. So then that's the reason why we have the racial hierarchy. According, as we know, David Hume, I think he ranked black people right at the bottom, Africans right at the bottom of the racial hierarchy. That's used to justify white supremacy. I mean, if they can claim, like they do, that black people are from apes, and somehow Europeans have ascended and are therefore superior, of course it's going to feed that narrative that black people are inferior. But the premise is wrong. The premise is false. It's a myth. It's something that somebody has made up because, one thing about white people is they have to have a reason for something. Black people, we just live on faith. You tell us something, we're more likely to believe it. The younger people are much more different. They're now reading and researching and learning. But the old-time black people, you tell them something, they believe it because they just believe that, they don't know that much. So what you told them, they believed. And a lot of them still do that. They can't be bothered to do the research themselves. So a lot of times they live on blind faith. Whereas white people, they don't do that. They question. They're curious. There's a lot of that professional curiosity going on, and even basic curiosity. And I remember I went to Jamaica. When I went to Jamaica, not recently, but quite a while ago, I went with a girlfriend of mine. And we used to get up early because we found out there was this little place where the locals used to fish. And there was this white woman, and she kept on asking us, "Where are you going? Where are you going?" She was so curious. And one day she waited. I don't know if she didn't sleep or what, but she waited until we left and she followed us. And I'm talking about curiosity. White people tend to be quite curious about a lot of things, and they need a reason. And if they don't have a reason, they make one up. And a lot of times, if the person who's made up a theory or a reason to justify, say, black people being inferior, like Darwin, for example, and that person is influential and that gets documented, that then becomes almost a fact until there's somebody that comes along who can refute it. And they did have some evolutionary scientists who did reject that theory. But the fact of the matter is, it's still recorded, it's still taught in schools. And that's all to justify white supremacy, so that they do not have to compete with blacks because they're down there. So why would they compete with somebody who's down there? They'd have no reason to. And that's why they've got to keep them down there. They've got to make people feel as though they are less than. So apart from animalization, black people, there's also the label of black people being contaminated and diseased. I've already said that. I've already talked about the simian flu pandemic in the Planet of the Apes, although fictitious, was an artificially created retrovirus that killed over 3 billion people. How do we know the coronavirus isn't something similarly created? We don't know. There's plenty of rumours to suggest that it is. More recently, we're told that I've already said that. So to eliminate the competition, black people have constantly been represented as subhuman to justify chattel slavery, use of force, being gunned down, incarcerated, detained, or confined to a mental institution. That's the only way they can eliminate the competition. So there was something in what my friend was so passionate about. It could be jealousy and resentment. The fact that they may not win. Why black people have been so demonized is also the reason why they feel justified in ill-treating and discriminating against us, because on an even playing field, they probably feel they cannot win. You've got Mendelian genetics that suggests while we all descended from apes, the races became a separate species and that Africans were far closer to apes than the Europeans. However, this theory was subsequently rejected by evolutionary science that emphasized that similarities between different races and that differences in behavior were the product of culture, not biology. They've got nothing to do with our differences. So, and remember, Hitler hailed Aryan people as superior, blonde hair and blue eyes. It's a coincidence, isn't it, that both Boris Johnson, although his hair is dyed, and Donald Trump both have blonde hair and blue eyes. Is that a coincidence, I wonder? Giving them that air of physical superiority? Food for thought. So by associating black people with apes, Europeans have differentiated themselves biologically and culturally in an effort to maintain superiority, and that Darwin's evolution theory is taught in schools to perpetuate this myth. So that's why it continues. You kind of ask yourself, why, over the years, haven't we kind of evened out? How come we're not kind of on an even level field after all these generations have passed? And it's because they keep perpetuating Darwin's theory, evolutionary theory in schools, and telling them that, more or less black people were apes and, how we evolved and white people evolved further than black people and all of that kind of stuff. Just my thoughts, just throwing it out there. Anyway, so why is it important to maintain white supremacy and poison the mindset of generations to come? Is it because it is the only way to exploit black people? Is it the fear of competition? Is it because they fear being a minority and ultimately dominated by black people? Or is it simply jealousy that causes fear, anger, and hatred? You may ask, why does it matter? It matters because this is why there is covert racism and implicit bias, and why some people are quicker to associate positive concepts to white faces and negative concepts to black faces. So we get the indoctrination through stories, films, media, adverts, jokes, sitcoms, which help create stereotypes. And so when those stereotypes are on our screens, in our newspapers, all over the place, it goes into our subconscious. And sometimes people don't even realize how it impacts them until it does. A white person is not going to, the majority of white people do not consider themselves racist, and they wouldn't even know if they're racist unless unless something came up that forced them to address it, because it's subconscious. And like I said, it's implicit. It's sometimes if they were to do one of these project tests, they have these tests that I forget what they call them, but it's like an association test, and they might say ape, and the person might jump up and say black, or they might say criminal, and somebody might say youth. You see what I mean? It's like a word association thing. So they might not know consciously that they have these prejudices and biases, but because it's been infiltrated over the years and we've been drip fed in such subtle ways, that is why the majority of us are not making any headways, and we might as well be back 400 years until somebody does until the younger people who are educating and who are learning and who are teaching and who will not accept our laid back attitude and the fact that we accept everything that's given to us, they're actually saying, no, that's not right. We just swallow and see and kind of think, oh well, we've read that must be true. I mean, we're not, the older race is not a questioning race. I mean, when did we ever question the news? Piers Morgan, I mean, he's getting quite good at that. But we never used to question the news. We used to sit and watch the news, and whatever the news said was fact. It's only more recently, and like I said, it's the younger generations mainly who are questioning what we're being told. So many negative stereotypes have been subliminally induced, and the bearer is not even aware. Human beings are superior because of their reasoning powers, and like I said, no race needs to reason more than the white race. If they do not have a reason, they're likely to make it up. But like I said, majority of black people tend to use blind faith or believe what they're told. The younger blacks who are academics and starting researching and investigating, which is why we can prove that given the same opportunities, we are as good as anyone else, or any race and any colour. And that's all I've got to say. So I don't know how you're going to take this, but I'd be interested to find out. And that's all for now. Bye-bye.